going on, guys? Aquanet back with another video, and with the start of 2024 officially kicking off, I wanted to talk a little bit about the title of King of New York, what it means in 2024, and who really has the potential to take the helm of mainstream hip hop in New York by storm and really hold that King of New York mantle up and run with it. I think that right now there is no significant king in New York. We have certain figures who drop hits, but in my opinion, there's a lot that's required to truly be the king of New York. And I don't think anyone fills all of those categories. I think that you need, when you're talking about a king of New York, it's more than just somebody with a string of hits, it's more than just a really good artist. It's somebody who is, yes, can drop a string of hits, but it's also someone who has a dominant album that we can point to that is truly emblematic of the sound and of the era that they existed, as well as the faith of the New York people, right? Like, it's one thing to be an artist in New York who is big, it's another thing to be a big artist in New York. I think that what a lot of people miss about certain artists is that, like, there are certain artists that come out of New York, but when it comes to being the king of New York, it's New York itself that actually has to love you. And while I think that this metric is somewhat arbitrary, you can feel with prior kings of New York how much, even now, New York looks back and has so much respect for those artists, such as Nicki Minaj, such as Pop Smoke, such as 50 Cent, such as Biggie. To be clear, also, um, I'm not really gonna. I know that king is like an inherently masculine term. I'm not gonna restrict my list of people who I think can be the next king in New York to just men, because at this point, I think that uh, there are women who, you know, have the potential to take up that mantle. But yeah, right now, I don't think that there's anybody. Honestly, I think that Ice Spice has a solid string of hits, but doesn't really have a body of work that stands up to other kings of New York. I think that A Boogie is an artist consistently dropping quality music that is indeed from New York, but I don't think that, you know, his mainstream presence, as well as his general public favor, would lend him king of New York at the current moment. I think to a certain extent his sort of peak power mainstream wise has somewhat dried up. Uh, and that leaves us with five, in my opinion, potential candidates that I would love to see take the helm and become king of New York. And I'm going to order these based off of how likely they are, in my opinion, to truly take the New York rap scene by storm and become the king of New York. Starting with the fifth and least likely person, but I still consider, like, you know, a possibility. And it pains me to say it, but I'm gonna say Fabio Foreign. Fabio Foreign has a lot of pros. Specifically, his career is very new, which means that the opportunity for him to improve and continue to make music that is incredible, or grow, is definitely out there. On top of the fact that I think that his actual artistic standard is high enough. You know, I don't think that he's all that much worse than prior kings of New York from an artistic standard perspective, such as Nicki Minaj or Pop Smoke or A Boogie. Well, I don't think he's overall better than these artists. I don't think that his artistic, you know, capabilities are necessarily so much worse. Um, and I think he creates great music. Fabio Foreign also has the ability to drop hits. Not only do you have songs like Big Drip and City of Gods, but you even have lower key hits, such as this most recent one, Teach Me How to Drill, What's My Name, and Magic City. So it's not like Favi is necessarily allergic to mainstream success. However, there are a few concerns about, you know, his rise to the top, or potential, you know, becoming the potential of him becoming the king of New York. One of which is his lack of innovation at this point in his career. Given that we've already had an artist who really blew up on the drill sound and took the New York scene by storm, we'd be hard pressed to sort of have another person do the exact same thing. Uh, and it's also clear that hip hop somewhat feels like it's going in a different direction than what Fabio Foreign is currently offering. And so uh, that on top of the sort of diminishing returns that his hits have been giving ever since Big Drip, sort of leads me to believe that a mainstream comeback from Favi is less likely than I would personally like. Or I would personally be comfortable with. I'm very curious to see what he does with his next album, and if he can put some quality hits on the board that actually have some staying power. But for now, due to the instability of his mainstream success and his declining monthly listeners, I do have to keep him at 5. And number 4, to me, this is where we get a bit interesting. Number 4, I'm going to go with Ice Spice. Now, Ice Spice has a lot of pros, a lot of pros. She is a rising star with her sound being very, very high in demand. She clearly has the ability to improve and grow as an artist, and she's definitely found her niche. Uh, Oh, and one thing I also forgot to mention with Fabi that is in his favor is that he also has a lot of very established connections. It's something I feel that Ice Spice, definitely benefits from as well. But Fabi, I think more than anybody, benefits from having a lot of established connections with people like Kanye, Nicki Minaj, and other artists, Polo G, and so you know he has the potential when it comes to features and resources on projects. He has a lot of resources that can help him. But going back to Ice Spice, she's clearly got the ability to evolve artistically, and she's clearly in very, very high demand. Uh, However, I think when it comes to this list and what I will ask of people, I feel more comfortable asking people to become more mainstream successful than I do feel comfortable asking them to grow significantly as artists. The biggest thing that I'm mainly concerned about with Ice Spice is that, like, with her current sound and with what she's shown us to be capable of so far, I don't have much faith in her ability to drop a full mainstream album. A 15 to 16 song record, I don't know if that would sound very good. I don't know if it would have variety. I would imagine that at this point it might get a bit monotonous just based off of what she's proven to us so far, right? And so while I do feel like she is definitely, from a mainstream perspective, the hottest artist in New York right now, and seems to be the sort of hottest commodity of New York, I do feel like Ice Spice really needs to, for at least in terms of like how she's gonna create a dominant run, she would need to really uh, improve her the quality of her art and be able to prove to create a strong body of work, as well as display some versatility and improved rapping. At least, again, my this is just my opinion. Number 3, I'm gonna go with Lil Tecca, and this is a really really interesting one because he kind of flies under the radar for a lot of people a little bit. I do think I think that Lil Tecca kind of solves both problems, but just not to the extent that either of the prior two do. Like, he's not quite as popular as Ice Spice, nor is he quite as good with albums as Fabio Foreign. But I feel like he represents a happy middle ground where he still drops really great projects and really interesting bodies of work, as well as he's still dropping really good really like mainstream music. I think his last album sold like 41K, which was higher than 222 and the Bible. So it's clear that there is a mainstream demand for Lil Tecca. Similar to Favi, there is that concern of feeling like, is his mainstream success behind him, since he hasn't really dropped a hit that's been bigger than Ransom as of recently. Uh, that being said, Tecca does feel like he's on a serious incline when it comes to his popularity. And this has been a really interesting comeback to watch. And I do think that Tecca is someone who artistically is capable of engaging with longevity. Also, one thing I wanted to mention about all three of these people so far is that I think up to this point, these three artists are very closely tied to New York. New York loves all three of these because they're authentically from the borough, and all three of them represent aspects of New York that we've already seen before. And so, yeah, I think also from a New York acceptance standpoint, these first three candidates are really, really strong. Also, while I don't think that this is necessarily going to super hurt him, it's just something we've never seen before. That being a King of New York that doesn't really have much in the way of substance. Uh, obviously, you could argue people like Pop Smoke maybe didn't have the highest amount of substance, but I would say that his lyrics still, to a certain extent, mattered. I think that it's going to be an interesting sort of direction that New York goes in when we have an artist who really is more known for the production and the soundscape as opposed to the lyrics. Something like a Travis Scott or a Lil Uzi Vert. Next, I'm gonna go with Lady London at the 2. Now, Lady London is a really interesting case because I think artistically she's at the top of New York music right now, in terms of her rapping ability and her artistic and musical standard. I think that she is incredibly strong, and on top of her signing with Def Jam, Jay Z's label, uh, she's got all of the connections and tools necessary. She's got some of the connections and tools necessary to be successful. And given that she has a great voice for hip hop, and as well as a solid debut album, she does have the potential to drop great music. That being said, the only scary part about Lady London is I think this is the one time where mainstream success really comes into question. She is definitely the smallest artist that I'm going to talk about on this list. I don't even think she's over a million monthly listeners. And she dropped an entire incredible body of work with a debut album, but there were very few hits on that. And Yeah Yeah was the most popular song. And while it was decent, for TikTok, it wasn't like a smash hit. And so the proof of her being able to drop, emblematic hits and anthems, I think to me at the current moment is definitely in question, right? And so for that reason, while I think that artistically she has the opportunity to, put New York in a chokehold, and she has the label resources now that she's signed with Def Jam, I think that she is the person who has the most ground to make up in terms of actually building a mainstream sound and creating anthems that we will all love to hear in the future. Also, one of the things working in Lady London's favor is that she is a very, very new artist with a full canvas to work from in terms of where her career can go. And I think that she isn't exactly begging for time when it comes to what her trajectory will be like. She's not close to retiring. She's just kind of gotten her foot in the door, and so that's also really exciting in terms of like the kind of potential that she has. Now, I think the most likely person to become the king of New York would definitely be Benny the Butcher. Now, Benny the Butcher is not a perfect candidate, but there's a few reasons why I think that Benny the Butcher is the most credible candidate. Number one is that he comes from a group with an already established fan base that is at this point been pretty accessible, especially for older hip hop listeners. And so he's already got a decent traction just on his own independently, from just having a large group. On top of the fact that he's proven to be able to drop a couple of hits with Big Dog and Johnny P's Caddy. And while generally those hits came from his, supporting cast, his contributions should not be denied, especially on a song like Big Dog, where he was in control of the chorus of that song, right? So, I definitely feel like Benny the Butcher is, definitely capable of dropping hits on top of his connections with people like Hit Boy and Harry Fraud. He's definitely got the ability to drop hits in the future. On top of like just the sheer quality of music that he puts out, his album output, he really has not dropped a bad album from what I've heard in this decade so far. And so, from that extent, also like Benny the Butcher is someone who is dropping hits, but is also dropping quality, and I think that that's something that's really important. Similar to Lady London, he's also a part of Def Jam, which is a label that, in my opinion, is really good at building up, you know, talent development. Right, taking people who are already talented and then catapulting them to success. Editor Ahmed here. I also forgot to mention that another issue with Benny the Butcher being the quote unquote candidate for New York is that he is extremely deep in his career. He's by far the oldest person on this list and has been rapping solidly since 2016. And that doesn't bode well in terms of how much artistic evolution he can have on top of, his retirement plans. Right. And finally, I think, and this is what sort of gives me the most hope for Benny the Butcher, is that his direction sonically is the one that I have the most faith in. Benny the Butcher, if you listen to him in interviews and if you listen to him talk, he's talking about how he is sort of tired of rapping people to death, and while he will still keep the same multi-syllabic rhyme schemes, I assume, and he'll keep the same solid bars, he's focusing more on the melodies and the production and vocal inflections of his music.
When I say instrument, I mean voice. Are you changing up your cadence, your flow? You like experimenting with how to approach records now? Are you
Very much so. I'm happy you asked that question. Very much so. I got a couple melodies on there.
Yeah.
You know
Okay.
what I'm saying? I made a mental note going in, working on the album to switch my flow up. So I got about 7 different flows on here and just expressing how I feel in a different.
Which all makes me feel like he's gearing up for a more musical based album in this next project. I didn't really think about this until I was rewatching this interview, but also the title of Everybody Can't Go is quite possibly symbolism for his departure from underground music and his foray into a really strong attempt into mainstream appeal and mainstream music. He's talked about, in that interview, wanting to make music that would be accepted by Grammys and the dominant society. And I think when we talk about Everybody Can't Go, I think part of his sort of growth or part of this process with this album is shedding his identity as an underground king and emerging as a mainstream artist. And so I think that he's very conscious of what he's trying to do, and that's evident through the title of the record. With this also being his Def Jam debut, and this will be sort of, him on a major label really pushing, I do feel like his direction and the amount of things working in his favor, and as well as, most importantly, his mindset on this all, gives him the greatest chance of being the potential king of New York, to have a very dominant run. Now, obviously, he's not the perfect candidate because nobody is, right? In terms of being accepted by New York, him and Lady London are a bit of oddballs. Lady London isn't as clearly from New York. I know I've certainly gotten questions here and there on whether or not she's from New York and this, that, and the other. And Benny the Butcher being from Buffalo, there's just so much baggage and fight against Buffalo that New York City people seem to have for some reason. And it makes it harder for them to get into. Conway's talked about that in the past, feeling like, them being from Buffalo, it's harder for them to sort of get the attention that they deserve, right? And if it's definitely a question of if New York can accept him. But what I will say about that is that I think that there is a decent chunk of New York fans who miss that Joey Badass, Dave East, or even, going older, that Jay-Z and Biggie era of music that Benny the Butcher kind of supplies in this modern era. I think it's important to understand that while Benny the Butcher may not be from the city that you like, or maybe from a city that you're familiar with, his sound is just as New York as A Boogie. His sound is just as New York as Pop Smoke. It's just from an older era, but an era of New York nonetheless. I hope y'all really enjoyed this video. Let me know what y'all think is likely to be the King of New York in the comment section below. I really enjoyed talking about this, coming up with this list, and coming up with these pros and cons. With that being said, peace, y'all.